again, I don't care. I don't care about cutting through the outside panel on the other side because we're going to make 2 new quarter panels for it on the bottom.
Bad Chad Hiltz built a reputation as one of the most unconventional custom car fabricators on television. His Discovery series Bad Chad Customs introduced a global audience to a small Nova Scotia garage where scrap metal, discarded parts, and imagination were turned into working machines. For 2 seasons, the show documented his process in detail and helped expand his following far beyond Canada. Then, the television presence stopped. No formal announcement explained the change, and viewers were left to piece together what had happened. The absence created confusion because Chad himself did not disappear. His workshop remained active, and new projects continued to surface online. Understanding the gap between the end of the series and his continued work requires separating assumption from verifiable facts, and looking closely at how his career evolved after television. Chad Hiltz, widely known as Bad Chad, developed his reputation long before television introduced him to an international audience. Based in Nova Scotia, he built his career around a highly unconventional approach to automotive fabrication. Rather than restoring vehicles to factory condition, his work focused on transforming discarded parts into entirely new creations. Scrap metal, salvaged frames, and mismatched components became the foundation of cars that were engineered as much through experimentation as through formal design. This process distinguished his shop from traditional restoration garages and helped define his public image as a builder who valued creativity over polish. His workshop operated with a small team and a hands-on philosophy. Projects were rarely straightforward. Vehicles were often assembled from parts never meant to coexist, requiring constant adaptation during construction. This improvisational style became central to his identity and later to the appeal of his television series. Viewers were drawn to the unpredictability of the builds and the visible problem-solving that occurred in real time. The environment emphasized function and ingenuity rather than spectacle, presenting fabrication as a practical craft shaped by resourcefulness. When Bad Chad Customs premiered on Discovery, the series formalized what online followers had already been watching for years. The show documented the same working conditions and methods that defined his garage, but with a broader production framework. It highlighted the tension between ambition and limitation, showing how complex vehicles emerge from minimal resources. By the time the series gained traction, Chad was already recognized within niche automotive circles as a builder willing to take risks others avoided. That reputation set the stage for both his television exposure and the questions that would follow after it ended. The Discovery series, Bad Chad Customs, marked a turning point in Chad Hiltz's public visibility. Premiering to an audience unfamiliar with his earlier online work, the program translated his garage process into episodic television. Each installment centered on a build that appeared improbable at the outset, constructed from salvaged materials and shaped through trial, revision, and persistence. The structure of the show emphasized the constraints of time, budget, and parts availability, reinforcing the idea that ingenuity could compensate for limited resources. This framing aligned closely with the reputation Chad had already built, but television amplified the scale of his reach. The series ran for 2 seasons and established a consistent international following. Viewers responded to the authenticity of the workshop environment and the absence of heavy dramatization. The appeal rested less on competition and more on observing a craftsperson navigate complex mechanical problems. His small team functioned as an extension of that process, contributing labor and ideas without overshadowing the central focus on fabrication. The tone remained grounded in practical work rather than staged conflict, which distinguished the program from many automotive reality formats. When the series stopped producing new episodes after its 2nd season, there was no detailed public explanation attached to the conclusion. Discovery did not release an extended statement clarifying the decision, and the production timeline ended quietly. The lack of formal closure created uncertainty among viewers who had expected continuation. Because the show had become the primary way many audiences followed Chad's work, the sudden absence of new installments led to speculation about the reasons behind the change, even as his workshop activity continued outside the television framework. After the television series concluded, attention shifted toward Chad Hiltz's online presence, where his work had originally gained traction. Unlike the abrupt halt of new broadcast episodes, his digital output did not end. His primary YouTube channel continued to document ongoing builds, shop routines, and experimental fabrication projects. These uploads preserve the same informal workshop atmosphere seen on television, but without network structure or episode deadlines. The pacing reflected the realities of long-term mechanical work, where progress often unfolded gradually, rather than within a fixed production schedule. Viewers who transitioned from the Discovery series to his online platform found continuity in both style and subject matter. The builds remained ambitious and unconventional, often centered on vehicles assembled from mixed components. Among the most visible projects was a recreation inspired by an ultra-high-value Bugatti, constructed using accessible materials and custom fabrication techniques. The project reinforced his reputation for tackling ideas that bordered on impractical, then methodically turning them into working machines. There was a brief period when uploads slowed noticeably, prompting questions about whether activity had stopped altogether. The gap lasted only a short time, and posting resumed without a formal explanation or announcement. This interruption was enough to renew speculation among followers already sensitive to the earlier end of the television series. However, the return to regular content demonstrated that the workshop itself remained operational. The fluctuation highlighted a key difference between independent online production and network television. Digital creators operate without fixed release obligations, making pauses more visible but not necessarily indicative of larger problems. Chad's continued output suggested evolution rather than disappearance. As the gap between the end of the Discovery series and Chad Hiltz's continued online activity became clearer, discussion increasingly moved into fan communities. Viewers attempted to interpret the absence of new television episodes using fragments of information drawn from social media, archived interviews, and the visible shift toward independent production. Without an official statement outlining the network's decision, these conversations often blended verifiable facts with personal assumptions. The result was a narrative shaped less by confirmed reporting and more by collective speculation. Online forums and comment sections reflected a mix of disappointment and curiosity. Some followers interpreted the end of the show as evidence of behind-the-scenes conflict, while others viewed it as a routine network cancellation similar to many short-run specialty programs. Because Chad continued to post workshop content, the theory that he had stepped away from fabrication entirely did not hold. Instead, the focus turned to the changing economics of automotive television and the growing viability of creator-driven platforms. Independent channels allowed builders to maintain direct audience relationships without network mediation. This environment amplified the perception of silence, even though work remained visible to anyone following his digital platforms. The absence was tied specifically to broadcast television, not to his career as a fabricator. The distinction mattered, but it was often blurred in casual discussion. Over time, the persistence of new projects made it harder to argue that Chad had withdrawn from public work. What disappeared was a particular format, not the workshop itself. The conversation gradually shifted from questioning his presence to recognizing a transition in how that presence was delivered. Chad Hiltz's continued focus on independent production reflected a broader shift within automotive media. As traditional specialty television narrowed its programming slate, many builders found that online platforms offered greater flexibility and financial sustainability. For Chad, direct publishing allowed him to control pacing, project selection, and presentation without adapting his work to network formatting requirements. The workshop remained the central subject, but the storytelling became less constrained by episodic structure and more aligned with the natural rhythm of fabrication. This independence also changed how audiences engaged with his work. Instead of waiting for a seasonal release cycle, viewers could follow builds as they developed in real time. Updates varied in length and frequency, mirroring the unpredictability of mechanical progress. Some projects stalled, others accelerated, and the audience observed that variability without the expectation of tidy television arcs. The transparency reinforced the authenticity that had attracted viewers in the first place. At the same time, the shift highlighted the difference between mass broadcast exposure and niche digital reach. Television had introduced Chad to a global audience unfamiliar with custom fabrication culture. Online production served a more targeted community, already invested in the craft. While the scale of exposure changed, the core appeal did not. His identity as an experimental builder remained intact, supported by a viewer base that valued process over polish. The evolution illustrated how specialized creators increasingly operate outside traditional media systems while maintaining visibility and influence within their field. A visible part of Chad Hiltz's post-television period has been the introduction of collaborative projects that extend beyond his original workshop format. One of the most notable developments is the appearance of content featuring his son, Colton, through the channel commonly known as Bad Chad and The Lad. This expansion reflects continuity rather than reinvention. The builds still revolve around improvised fabrication and unconventional vehicle concepts, but the presence of a younger collaborator adds a generational dimension to the work. It documents skill transfer in real time, showing techniques, decision-making, and mechanical judgment being shared within the shop environment. This collaboration reinforces the idea that the workshop functions as an evolving space rather than a fixed production model tied to television. The projects remain experimental and resource-driven, maintaining the same emphasis on adaptation that defined Chad's earlier reputation. At the same time, the dynamic between father and son introduces a quieter narrative about mentorship and sustainability within craft industries. Viewers are not simply observing finished vehicles. They are watching the continuation of a working tradition. The emergence of this partnership also clarifies that Chad's career did not contract after the end of the Discovery series. Instead, it diversified. By integrating family collaboration into public documentation, he broadened the identity of his brand while preserving its mechanical core. The workshop remains active, the builds continue, and the visibility of the process persists through independent media. The transition underscores a shift from network-defined storytelling to creator-controlled continuity, anchored in the same physical space where his work began. Taken together, the end of the Discovery series and the continuation of Chad Hiltz's workshop activity illustrate a separation between television exposure and professional practice. The disappearance of new broadcast episodes created the impression of a sudden halt, but the underlying work never stopped. His garage remained operational, projects continued to move forward, and documentation shifted to platforms he controlled directly. The perception of silence was largely tied to the absence of a network framework that had previously concentrated attention in one place. This distinction is important when evaluating how modern craft careers develop in public view. Television compresses complex long-term labor into structured narratives designed for seasonal release. Independent production exposes the same labor without that compression, making progress appear slower but more accurate. In Chad's case, the transition revealed how much of his appeal was rooted in process rather than packaging. The audience that followed him online demonstrated sustained interest in the mechanics of fabrication, even without the pacing imposed by broadcast storytelling. No verified evidence suggests a dramatic rupture behind the end of the series. What can be observed is a practical shift toward a model that favors autonomy and direct audience connection. His career trajectory aligns with a wider movement among specialized builders who use digital platforms to bypass traditional media constraints. The workshop continues to function as both workplace and subject, and its visibility persists through ongoing documentation. The narrative is less about disappearance than about reconfiguration, shaped by changing media economics and the adaptability of the creator at its center. The discussion surrounding Chad Hiltz ultimately reflects how audiences interpret gaps in visibility, rather than confirmed breaks in activity. When a television series ends without a detailed public explanation, viewers often construct their own conclusions to fill the space. In this case, the absence of new Discovery episodes became a focal point that overshadowed the continued operation of his workshop. Over time, the persistence of independent output provided a clearer record than speculation ever could. His builds, uploads, and collaborations serve as verifiable evidence of ongoing work. This pattern is consistent with broader changes in how media careers are tracked. Television once functioned as the primary archive of a creator's presence. Today, digital platforms create parallel archives that remain active regardless of network decisions. Chad's trajectory demonstrates how a public figure can appear to withdraw from one medium while remaining fully engaged in another. The workshop did not close, and the fabrication process did not pause in any lasting way. Only the distribution channel changed. Assessing the situation through documented activity rather than rumor leads to a more restrained conclusion. The end of Bad Chad Customs as a broadcast program marked the conclusion of a specific partnership, not the disappearance of its central figure. His professional identity continues to be defined by the same hands-on experimentation that established his reputation. The record that exists online shows continuity, adaptation, and sustained productivity. In practical terms, the silence attached to his name describes a shift in format, not an absence of work. The available record shows that Chad Hiltz's career did not end with the conclusion of his television series. The workshop remained active, projects continued, and documentation shifted toward platforms under his direct control. The perception of disappearance emerged from the loss of a broadcast format that had concentrated attention, not from a halt in fabrication. His trajectory reflects a broader transition within specialized media, where creators increasingly operate outside network systems while maintaining public visibility. The distinction between television absence and professional continuity is central to understanding what actually changed.